Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So yes, I have my little webcam turned on today. I just decided to pop on. As you can tell by the title, we will be talking about a potentially new large winter storm that could be occurring across a good portion of the northern United States. This storm will be more characteristic and classic of the winter storms that we typically see during this time of the year. It will not be bringing nearly as much cold air as its previous system, but it will be bringing a lot more widespread heavy snow. And at this point, it's not that far out. It's around 100 hours away from occurring. So I have pretty good confidence that this system will be occurring. It's just a matter of where the heaviest snow will fall, how much heavy snow will fall, and kind of where the warm fronts will be aligned, where the cold fronts will be, and those kind of macro details, if you will. So before we do that, though, I do want to spend around 3 minutes. I'll put a little marker, you should be appearing right now at the bottom of the screen, where I start talking about the new storm, because I want to spend the first few minutes talking about the previous storm, going over the previous snowfall amounts and kind of the cold air that is left in its wake and some of the records that were broken. I also want to mention that yesterday I was planning on recording a video, but there was a problem with YouTube processing servers, and they took around 1 to 2 hours to process instead of the usual 5 to 10 minutes. So by the time it was done, it was already like 10 o'clock Central Time, so I was like, it's too late. So, yeah, that's the reason why I didn't upload a video yesterday, but obviously, today's a new day, so hopefully we don't have the same issues. And if you're seeing the video on the 19th, then that means we didn't have any issues. All right, let's start talking about these storms. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the snowfall accumulations from this past snowstorm. So again, they were pretty impressive. Notice that as I zoom in onto the UP of Michigan, this is where the heaviest snow has fallen, and this is where they were predicted to have the heaviest snowfall. Notice some of these areas got a lot of snow within a short amount of time, 6 inches in past 9 hours, but the total amount came out to even more impressive amounts of around 18 inches. There were numerous reports well over a foot, and some were again even approaching a foot and a half. Because of how spotty population is up here, and how not everyone reports snowfall reports to the National Weather Service, I assume that there were some amounts that were getting close to that 20-inch mark. 2 feet seems a bit of a stretch, but regardless, definitely a impressive system. And do note how pretty varied it was. Where the heaviest bands occurred, it was closer to 18 inches, and some other areas were 2 to 3 inches. Note, we did have some also decent snowfall accumulations across mainland Michigan, Gaylord, Michigan, right there, 9 miles south-southwest of it precisely, got 3 inches. Right across Indiana, you could precisely see where this lake effect band set up. You could see this long kind of fetch of decent lake effect accumulations, and across just north of Pittsburgh into Pennsylvania, and into right there, even Maryland got a little bit of snow. So definitely, again, the first snow for quite a bit of folks, and a lot of cold air. If I were to show you the current freeze watches, they are pretty extensive. Yesterday in the evening when I was recording the video, but I ended up not uploading it, they were even more expansive. Today seems to be kind of the last day of mass alerts. There definitely will be some tomorrow as well, but yes, definitely impressive. The amount of cold air this system chugged in, that was by far the most impressive feature of this storm. Notice some of these temperatures are going to be, quite frankly, colder than what my area has seen thus far. I'm right by the lake, so we kind of have a microclimate here in the Chicago area, and we haven't even had our first frost. Like, we've had a little bit of, the sensitive plants getting nipped, but quite frankly, the tomatoes, everything that normally would be destroyed by frost, they haven't. So, yeah, that's good for me. But notice that some of these areas, 32, that's going to be enough to kill a lot of those plants and whatnot. So yeah, definitely an early and kind of unreasonable first frost. Okay, so now this is where I'm going to start talking about this new storm. So as I look at the European model, which is the model that I like looking at the most, it is by far probably the most conservative and reasonable model. However, in recent years, the GFS has been seriously making leaps and bounds in terms of its accuracy, and it's gotten to a point where I use those two models interchangeably. Note, right now we still have a little bit of chilly air left, quite a bit of it actually left across the U.S., but within the next 24 to 30 hours, things start changing really quickly. As quick as this cold air moved in, it's going to move out, and that's for one particular reason. Actually, a series of reasons. So we're going to have these little low pressures, not the big storm, but just these little disturbances that are going to come across southern Canada in the next few days, and they're going to have a weak wind flow from the north. Then the bigger part of this is a high pressure starts developing across the southeastern United States. Notice that by Saturday, Friday, it's right there present. Not terribly strong, but it's there. Enough to make the wind flow combined with those low pressures from the northwest to steer the winds from the southwest. So how the winds came from the north brought the cold. These winds coming from the south and west will be bringing warm temperatures, and they will be pretty extremely warm. I'll show you in a minute the 2-meter temperature anomaly graph and how impressively quickly these temperature anomalies change. Do note that as I push this into the weekend, so this is now Friday, late Friday, we have a storm that moves into the northwestern United States. It's rather disorganized, doesn't have a huge area of circulation, but it has a lot of moisture and it's loaded with it. Now, what makes this even more interesting is that the environment here is being prepped for this storm if it were to make it out, which I'll show you in just a minute whether or not it does. If it does, it's going to take advantage of all the moisture and warmth that is being pumped in. And again, right now, this area is pretty much dry and void because of all the cool air that is there. But within just really under 60 hours, this complete atmosphere change is going to take shape. And notice these winds continue getting stronger because these lines continue getting compressed and tighter. The tighter these lines are, the stronger the winds. And in this case, are coming from the north and northwest. You could see this 540 line, which a couple days ago or yesterday was way down almost by the Gulf, is now across southern and central Canada. So yes, a very quick turnaround. Notice this low pressure seems to be doing fine. It's not getting shredded by the mountains, and in fact, it's keeping its energy and furiosity across the northwest, dropping quite a bit of snow across the mountains, quite a bit of rain. So that's good. It's going to leave a pretty nice snowpack early season one for some locations. And notice as soon as it heads out into the plains, this wind continues strengthening. The environment is primed at this point, and this system essentially explodes. Notice the amount of moisture that is falling across Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho. That's already worthy enough to talk about. That's going to be the first big widespread snowstorm of the season for those areas. Now, notice as we put this forward, this starts dropping a lot of snow into Montana, again, continuously into Wyoming, but it continues shifting slightly towards the east. And notice as soon as it kind of gets in those conditions, which at this point, this low pressure is strong enough to just pump up a lot of moisture without even the help from the high pressure, which at this point has disintegrated. Sunday, late afternoon, look what happens. Boom, we see explosive cold fronts develop, a lot of showers, a lot of moisture, and you could bet that this is going to have some scale of severe weather with it. Probably some long-tracked severe storms, maybe some tornadoes, hail, wind. Just because it's late in the season, it's not even that late, honestly. It's mid-October, mid to late October. Just because it's, even if this were to occur in November, there is always a severe weather threat. In December, January, it's pretty much always there. It's just a very situational, depending on how these storms form. And in this case, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, these are notorious for having tornadoes and especially strong wind events, these type of systems. We've seen that. We saw one that's very similar to this in December of last year that left a moderate risk of severe weather as high north as Iowa. So that was definitely an impressive one. I'm not saying there's going to be a repeat, but it's strikingly similar. Notice Montana, Wyoming get in on quite a bit of heavy snow. This is definitely going to be leading to accumulations, probably 1 to 1.5 feet of snow. And do note that as this pushes into the plains, a lot of rain, a lot of wind, and again, that's snow on the backside of this into Canada as well. So, the provinces of Canada also are going to get impacted by this. By Monday, during the early morning hours, during the day, this thing continues expanding, continues moving. You can see it's 981 millibars of low pressure, pretty strong. Notice the snowy side of this kind of starts winding down, but across Manitoba and especially, Manitoba, it really starts cranking out that heavy snow. And notice that this thing kind of eventually moves towards the north, and really some of these snowfall rates here across Canada get really impressive. And I do know I have Canadian viewers from these provinces, especially the southern area, so you could expect some chilly air, but also quite a bit of snow. And again, this exact track is still not confirmed. There are models that show the heavy axis of snow a bit further south, a bit further east, a bit further north, even than this. So it's still a bit undetermined. Again, the macro details, as I was earlier talking about. Notice the cold front really weakens as it pushes further east, and this necessarily won't be impacting the northeast in the same kind of fashion that it will be impacting the upper plains. It will be a lot weaker, but there are some early signs that there could be a developing cold front that develops a new system kind of from the tail of the storm. But notice, this thing really starts shearing out, becomes kind of a giant wind maker, but it loses a lot of its vigor and it just kind of pulls in some cool air into the United States. Now, notice, this is what I'm talking about. That little cold front could begin garnering some energy and potentially developing into some sort of a new storm. There are several models that show similar features to this. We'll have to see if there's enough cold air left in the wake of that system that could definitely produce some snow across, areas that are further south. Again, the details on that are still fuzzy. And I do also want to point out that there's going to be constant moisture coming in from the northwest. If you didn't notice, while this system is going on, take a look at British Columbia to northwest. There is constant storms moving in, and each one of those could spin up, a decent sized storm, especially the more moisture some of these waves have. Look at that. Northern California could be really getting a lot of rain. That is good. Lake Oroville is pretty low, so a lot of these rains will definitely help. And in terms of the total accumulated precipitation, including rain and snow, you can see clearly these areas will be getting a lot of rain, but also obviously the mountainous northwest and the northern plains, and even the south if that cold front starts to develop on the backside or kind of from the tail of that big system. If you were to take a look at the total snowfall, assuming a 10-to-1 ratio, so some of these amounts over here may be a bit lower because, well, quite frankly, it could be colder than just the kind of the 30 to 32 degrees that a 10-to-1 snow ratio usually occurs in. But nonetheless, they're going to be impressive snowfall amounts if this storm ends up occurring in a fashion that this model shows it. But also do note there could be some, snow across the panhandle of Nebraska into South Dakota, and there could be more even snow into North Dakota, depending on how the models kind of treat this storm in the next few days. Notice the mountain ranges, right? The Cascades, the Bitterroots, the Wasatch, the Colorado Rockies are all going to be getting on a pretty good amount of snow, especially the Grand Tetons. Again, a nice early kind of snowpack. It probably won't stick around for too long, but especially for the low-lying areas. But for the mountainous areas, it may stick around because, again, of all that constant moisture that's going to be feeding into the northwest. So there could be quite a bit of snow falling on top of this without even having a chance to melt. So yeah, definitely not bad news for the northwest, this system, and probably something you'd want. Again, it's not too early where the season would, where this storm would, destroy crops and whatnot. But it definitely is still slightly earlier on, and you want to avoid some of those, 2-foot amounts, as that isn't necessarily good, especially for cattle ranchers and whatnot. So that's just one model, the GFS or the European. Now let's take a look at the GFS. Again, you can see there's that old system spinning away. Here it shows us really nicely how this wind kind of switches 180. I mean, literally, look, you can see the millibars are the lines are facing towards the south and east, producing quite a bit of cold air, and then within a few days you can see the start shifting first kind of west to east and then eventually south to northeast, and that's where a lot of this energy and warm air gets pumped into the plains, and it kind of hovers there for a few days waiting for this system to take advantage of it. And again, it begins to appear that this system may be weakening, but right as it moves to the fronter, kind of the outer range of the Rockies, it begins intensifying. Look at that, the GFS, very strikingly similar to the European model, showing that very heavy snow across Montana, Wyoming, the Wasatch, right in Utah, Colorado, and it explodes in terms of intensity in a similar fashion compared to the European model. And you could see this GFS targets a lot of more North Dakota with some heavier snow, so that's already one difference that's slightly different. It has a much more powerful cold front that's slower moving than the European, so that's another difference. But you get the point that the system is there, and it's a powerful system with both of the models, regardless of which scenario comes true. And notice, again, this model has a lot stronger of a cold front. There are some models, especially from the ensembles, that are showing a development of just a separate storm that kind of rides to the north and east and interacts with some of this cold air left by that, I guess, that main storm system. That could lead to some additional snow further south. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but you could see the GFS, you could see kind of meanders this cold front and going through different stages of weakening and strengthening. We'll have to see whether or not something happens with that. Regardless, though, it does show a pretty nasty system. Let's take a look at the total precip. You could see pretty significant amounts where that snow falls and where that slow cold front is, much more than what the European showed, and quite a bit across the northwest as well. Total snowfall accumulations, again, more impressive across the plains, equally as impressive across southern Canada, affecting probably more populated areas according to the GFS, and again, rather significant amounts for the western mountainous areas. For the first storm of the season, this definitely is not bad. Is this going to be the biggest one you've ever seen? Absolutely not. So let's take a look at the temperatures, because I wanted to show you these temperatures I was talking about earlier, visualizing this for you, how quickly this turnaround will happen from these cool temperatures. And again, here we have the cool temperatures. Let me slow this down and play this. So this is Thursday. Here's the timeline for you. 1 p.m. tomorrow. The cool air is still hanging on, but look at this warmth. It's seemingly far away, and then look, within just a few hours, seemingly, which, I mean, quite frankly, it would be 24 to 30 hours, it moves into the eastern United States, and the intensity of it is also rather impressive. You can see some of these colorations are pretty dark. The northwest starts getting on those cool colors, and it's essentially a pattern flip. And again, when we have these two contrasting air masses, there's always something that's kind of bad happening, and in this case it would be that the severe weather, that snowstorm, and that nasty storm behind it. Again, the cold air left in this system's wake, it isn't much to cool off the eastern United States. It remains kind of across the west where that snowpack is, but that could still provide another energy for another storm, just maybe a bit further towards the east and south. So that's not necessarily something that's, I guess, something that we just have to pay attention to and keep in mind as we go past this initial storm. And let's take a gander now at some of the other models that we have. So we have the Canadian model. This is another good model I like to look at, though again, I've mentioned this many times, I don't like it as much as the GFS or the European, but let's take a glance at it. What it does similarly, well, it kicks that cool air out of here very quickly, just like the European and the GFS model. You can see it sets up that southwesterly flow. It brings in that system across the northwest, so far so good, but there are a few key differences. Notice it starts producing quite a bit of snow, right? But it's a bit further. It focuses some of the heavier amounts a bit further towards the west. And by the time it moves out into the eastern United States, you could see, eastern plains. I guess the western plains, just east of the Rockies, it kind of disconnects into two pieces. One piece flings quickly to the north. Another piece sits down here, producing some more significant amounts for the Colorado areas, and Rockies and areas, I guess. But you can see it kind of devolves into more of a pure rainstorm. Still a system that's definitely noteworthy, and it's going to be bringing a lot of rain, and eventually could bring some snow to southern Canada. But yeah, definitely a different setup and slightly different. It's the Canadian, so I will, take the GFS and European for now and kind of more of their scenario. But at the end, it could be just more of a combination between the two. Maybe the snow will occur further towards the east, and because of that, there will be some lesser amounts. Maybe it will stay kind of what the GFS and European are showing, more westward focused, and these amounts are going to get clobbered, while the eastern kind of area of this storm is going to get, again, that heavy rain and those warm temperatures. And you can see the Canadian also keeps things active, lots of areas of moving precip and whatnot in the future. In terms of temperatures, this is probably my least favorite aspect of the Canadian model. It does a pretty poor job usually, but regardless, it does show those very warm temperatures moving in pretty quickly. But yeah, you can see it quickly makes them, I think, a lot more extreme than they will be. I don't think we'll be necessarily almost heading off the charts with the warm air. We definitely will be warm and quite frankly hot. All right, there could be anomalies of 10 to 15, 20 degrees, but up to 30, that seems doubtful. And do note that the cool air across the west will be prevalent. How widespread that will be, it remains to be seen. And you can see that the Canadian kind of does some funky things, and it usually does this, kind of brings this cool air into areas that don't necessarily see it. And it's basically, from my previous studying of the Canadian, I could tell that it's just not as good of a model for the temperatures. Though definitely for storms, it's still a good model to be looking at. I could show you a few more, I think, because yes, okay, so we have a German model here. It's an Icon model. It's a decent model. Again, I would say it's similar to the Canadian, probably even less accurate, though it's good to look at nonetheless. And notice we have that storm moving in. We have those warm winds from that high pressure, and it's, again, you can see rather similar to the GFS and European, targeting Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and it does end up forming that system, kind of a combination of the GFS and the European and the Canadian. You can see it develops snow a bit more towards the west than the Canadian, but it's definitely more east than the European and the GFS. So, yeah, I would say this scenario is also probably less likely than the other two, but definitely could have a few features that could be used by the European and GFS as we get closer in time, and they kind of take on that trend. We'll have to see exactly, but you could see with both the German and the Canadian, there would be a lot of a rain that falls across the southern central plains that's pretty heavy because of the way they formed that almost completely rainstorm. And the European, if you recall, showed a lot less precipitation because it's more northernly oriented and it's a bit more explosive and not as long lasting in terms of its duration. So you can see these areas don't get as much precipitation. So yeah, that's basically it. Just wanted to show you the threat of this system. I'll be keeping you guys updated every single day, most likely. Maybe one day that will happen kind of similar to yesterday, where I won't be able to, not because because of me, but because of some YouTube issues. Hopefully, though, that won't happen. I'll keep that in mind when uploading that it could take longer than expected, because usually I kind of do things pretty quickly and hope that things cooperate, and any delay is a pretty big setback. But if I record earlier on in the day, that could be better, but I always can't. Today I actually can, but that's not always the case. Regardless, I want to show you one more model, CFS. This is kind of more for the fun of it. It's a climate model. It goes out very far, like 800 hours out, so almost, kind of a joke. But it is a good model to sometimes look at and see what pattern maybe will be shaping up, whether the westerly, kind of the northwest systems will continue coming in, whether there will be more of a cold shot of air. We'll have to see, right? So let's see. There we have that system that the GFS and all the models are showing. Again, I mean, it shows its own little version. Again, I don't really use this to track storms, but more of the broader picture. So notice what it does. It develops some sort of a system further eastward, maybe from the cold front of that system that I was talking about earlier, from that initial storm, where you could see delivering some snow into the eastern portions of Canada and the United States. It seemingly does kind of contribute into more of a cooler pattern. Maybe not so much activity across the northwest. The CFS, you can see it's more across British Columbia, the moisture coming in. So that's something maybe to note of. Yeah, I would say that's a good amount of cold, honestly. Probably more cold oriented than precipitation oriented from the northwest. So that's interesting. I was honestly expecting this model to show just more storms coming up the northwest, which it does, but it's not to the same extent that I was thinking. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. If you take a look at the 2-meter temperatures, 2-meter temperature anomaly especially, you'll notice that it favors a lot of cool air, especially towards late October, early November. These cool shots, right? And there will be warmer that mixes in, but the cool air, especially at these times, will be a bit more pronounced. Right there, look at that. That's pretty impressive. So yeah, we'll have to see. I guess just a very changeable pattern. Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, that's basically it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all on the next episode. See ya.